Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Collins with the Louisiana State Bar Association, and welcome to our Law Talks virtual workshop series. Today's Law Talks is Immigration, Know Your Rights. We have attorney Miriam Crespo here today, who is an immigration attorney with her own practice, who's going to be presenting on this important topic. All right, perfect. And we've got the slides up now. So on the next slide, before we get started, I need to just cover a few important reminders. First, this presentation is being live streamed, so questions will be taken at the end, and if time permits, answered live. If you're watching at a library, you can walk up to the computer or ask to ask your question or ask a library staff to submit it for you. If you're watching on Zoom, please submit the questions in the Q&A section. If you're watching via Facebook, please submit the questions in the comment section, and one of our staff members will make sure that the questions make their way to Zoom. Miriam, if you could advance to the next slide. Please just note that this is being live streamed and is public, so all of the comments and questions are public and accessible by anyone during and after the presentation is over. If you could advance to the next slide, we just want to read our disclaimer. Please note that the information provided at this presentation does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice. Instead, all of the information, content, and materials are for general informational purposes only. No viewer of this video should act or refrain from acting based on information provided in this presentation without first seeking legal advice from counsel in the relevant jurisdiction. If you need assistance finding legal help, please go to the LSBA Find Legal Help page. The LSBA's inclusion of a program is not deemed to be a statement or an endorsement of the views expressed therein by the LSBA or any of its members. Speaking on LSBA programs, speakers were carefully selected for their knowledge, but neither the LSBA nor the speaker warrants that the presentations are free of error or will continue to be accurate. Statements in the presentations and the materials should be verified before relying on them. Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the LSBA, its sections, or its committees, and views expressed are those of the authors and contributors only.
Before we keep going, I'm sorry to interrupt. The PowerPoint is coming up really, really small for some reason. Is there a way to increase that size or reshare the screen?
Rebecca, did you want to go ahead and share just I guess to avoid issues?
Yep, sure thing. Give me one moment. Is that better?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So as I mentioned today, our presenter is Miriam Crespo, an immigration attorney. Ms. Miriam Crespo started her solo practice in April of 2017. She's a New Orleans native and was born of a Honduran mother and a Mexican father. In 2007, she earned her JD from Loyola University College of Law, and she has previously worked as the managing immigration attorney at Catholic Charities of Baton Rouge and as an associate for Maria Baldini and Associates in Chicago. She has also worked as a project attorney for the Legal Orientation Program for Custodians of Undocumented Alien Children through the Catholic Legal Immigration Network in Washington, D.C. So Miriam is a great person to be presenting on these topics today. She's very experienced in immigration law issues. So I'm going to turn it over now to Miriam to get started on her presentation.
Okay. My name is Miriam Crespo. I am very happy to be here. I think that Know Your Rights are the best way to sort of get the right tools in the tool belts of the people who need help the most. I've done Know Your Rights since my first year of law school. I had the opportunity to do Know Your Rights at different detention centers through the law clinic program. And it's definitely one of the ways that we can best distribute information and calm down some of the anxiety that we know our community is going through. Next slide. Can you go to the next one? Okay, so one of the important points where we should start is understanding all the executive orders that were released by the president to sort of understand where we stand with everything that has been going on and all the changes that have happened since this new administration. So we all have heard about the first attempt of denying citizenship to those who are children who are born of undocumented people who live in the United States. Another executive order discussed the expedited removal process, and the purpose of this expedited removal process was to see anybody who does not have a pending court hearing, and that person who's been here for less than 2 years, doesn't have a court hearing, that they would automatically convert into an expedited removal order. Many people don't understand that there's different ways to be removed or deported from the United States. Expedited removal is one that kind of jeopardizes anything that you can do in the future. So this really makes me think about, I had a client who was an asylum seeker. He was from Cameroon and he was detained for 2 years. His first 2 years here in the United States, the only thing he knew was the detention center. He never had been in the United States, and for 2 very long years, we fought his asylum case, and thankfully we won. But what it means is that it would put a lot more people in the situation like my client, because if you'd like to fight your case, you'd be detained, and if not, if you don't have a current hearing, you wouldn't even get a chance to tell your story, to explain the reason of why you made this journey. Expedited removal will rob people of the opportunity of being able to seek refuge, submit asylum applications, or reunify with their families. Another executive order that has come during these times is that we, for the longest time, have relied on churches and schools, different places that provide services to the community to be able to provide a safe space for the immigrant community. And one of the executive orders addresses exactly that point, and it opened the doors so that those places are no longer safe places where people can go if they feel persecuted and could feel protected or seek assistance or help, because now it's open that officers can go into those places and make certain arrests. And we will address later on in this presentation that even though that's what the executive order says, there are things that these churches, schools, and shelters and community places can do in order to protect the people that they're still providing services to or help to in the immigrant community. Next slide. Other executive orders, one of them dealt with restricting work applications or applications to obtain authorization to work, not available to people who don't have status at all. So in my opinion, this is not logical, right? We want people in our community to be able to work lawfully. We want them to be able to drive lawfully. We want them to be able to buy insurance, car insurance. And it actually would be revenue for the states if they were allowed to do that in each of the states. But the executive order made an attempt to restrict work permits to people, even if they had pending applications. So even if you submitted an asylum application, this executive order seeks to not allow that person to have work authorization while they're pending for that application to be adjudicated. So again, in my opinion, not being able or not allowing the immigrant community to work while they're pending these applications when there's such a slow process in the courts. I was at court this morning and I was set for a hearing for someone's asylum application in 2028. So this is not a process that's necessarily slow. And in the interim, if the person is able to have employment, be able to provide for their families. I always hear in the news that people are so concerned about immigrants being a public charge. But the reality is if they would have authorization to work, that's a way to avoid that by restricting work permits to people who don't have status, or even those who have something pending. You're seeking for people to depend on other people to be able to provide for themselves. Another executive order also addressed temporary protection status, which is also referred to as TPS. There are certain countries that have had TPS based on some type of natural disaster, and through this means we're able to obtain a work authorization to be in the United States. One of the executive orders targets this type of relief for immigrants and wants to do away with it completely. Again, leaving an even bigger population of people vulnerable. In this type of situation for TPS immigrants, it's even worse in the sense that this protection in many instances has been awarded for years at a time. And so we're talking about individuals who have been working lawfully with the work permit, who have a social security number, who have a license and have ties to the community, sometimes even more than 10 years, that are business owners, that are students, that are graduates. So that's one of the executive orders that also tries to limit the immigrant community in that way. Another executive order attempts to halt what sometimes people refer to as sanctuary cities. I understand that, for example, when you apply for a U visa, the police department or the district attorney's office has to provide a certification for a person to apply for that relief. Here where we are in New Orleans, the New Orleans department has a person assigned in the police department, has a person assigned in the district attorney's office who helps with the certifications for this type of relief. For this type of relief, we're speaking about people who were victims of crimes, right? So these are people who were victim of a crime, who've cooperated with the district attorney, sometimes in capturing people who maybe, they were one of many victims, right? But none of the other victims were able to get the police there fast enough or were able to identify the person. So this type of relief is for people who have been victims of a crime. And the funding cities that provide help to things such as this is what one of the executive orders also targets. Rebecca, I don't know if as we're going, do we have any questions in the chats that we can answer? I think it's important to kind of address anybody's questions if they have any.
It doesn't look like we have anything. Oh, let me see. It doesn't look like we have anything in the Q&A right now.
Okay, next slide. Okay, something else that has arisen out of this new administration is something that's called the Laken Riley Act. The Laken Riley Act is an act that centers around increasing the number of arrests of people who have not found a relief to be able to remain in the country. It also augmentates the crimes that a person, or what's considered a crime for a person to be detained by the police and then released to immigration custody. It also means that within these categories, prior to this act, there's something that's called mandatory detention. In mandatory detention, there's certain groups of people who have to be detained if they have a conviction for a certain type of crime. The Laken Riley Act, what it does is it expands this category of people who, if they are detained, will not be able to fight for a bond or some type of form of relief based on the fact that they have something as a minor crime, such as theft or shoplifting. For example, a person who is convicted of one of these things, or even if a case is dismissed, but the fact that the person, when you're asking for a bond and you're in detention, you have to fill out what's called a bond worksheet. And in the bond worksheet, you put information such as your criminal history. So even if something happened where it was a misunderstanding and the case was dismissed, you still have to list it on the sheet. And what it means is if you're listing something that maybe you were accused of a theft or shoplifting and the case was dismissed because that was the result of that case, you would still have to list it. And what it means under the Laken Riley Act is that person will not be eligible for a bond and wouldn't be able to be released from custody to be able to fight for the relief to be able to remain in the United States. An additional directive that we've seen is stating that even if a person has a form of relief and has something pending, so whether it's a minor who has a special immigrant juvenile status application, or a woman or a man or a child who has suffered violence and has a VAWA application pending, or someone who's been trafficked, that this vulnerable population of people will also be targeted. I think that in all these executive orders, what I kind of see in between the lines is the fact that if today you don't have something that protects you, if today you don't have in your hands your residency or your citizenship, then everybody's at risk, right? But the reason that these Know Your Rights are important is because we can read all these things and we can hear about all these things, and it could cause a panic in the community. But it's really understanding what these things mean, which things are actually being enforced, and if they are, how to react to them, and things that you can do to be able to provide the best advocacy for yourself or for someone else. So again, I think that the underlying theme in all of these executive orders is targeting anyone who today doesn't have something in their hand, right? Because in this directive that was leaked, there's information about victims of human trafficking, domestic violence, and minors, that even if those people have relief, have something pending, that they still today don't have a legal status that would allow them to remain, and that those people are vulnerable or susceptible to being detained by ICE. So keeping in mind that that's the underlying theme, what's important is to find a way to provide the best type of representation for yourself or for others by being informed, which is why these Know Your Rights are so important. So I hope that today we're able to provide a lot of information that's going to help you when you're facing one of the issues in one of these executive orders, to be able to maneuver and navigate and help yourself or others. Next slide. Okay, so what can the police do to me? So I think that in the immigrant community, or in general, the public thinks that you owe this deference and respect to police officers. And you absolutely, I do believe that law enforcement puts their life on the line to protect citizens. But when it comes to immigration, there's a difference in showing respect and protecting your rights. Local police officers cannot arrest somebody solely because of their immigration status. And so what's going on with all of these changes in these executive orders is there's something called 287G, which is an agreement that sometimes local police enforcement enters with ICE, which is ICE, Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement. So they work together in the sense that if the police stop somebody for running a light or for speeding, that even though that was the main cause of their stop, that for something so minor, they will be sent to Immigration, Customs Enforcement custody because of the fact that in the moment they might not have status, or maybe they do, but the police officer doesn't understand because it's not something common. And what I mean by this is there's asylum, and I hear this all the time when people go to to DMV to be able to obtain a license. Sometimes organizations or businesses learn about a certain type of documentation in immigration, and they expect everybody to have that same documentation, which is not true. And so something as asylum, on the asylum application, you're applying for asylum, you're applying for withholding or removal, and you're applying for Convention Against Torture. You never hear somebody saying, oh, I'm applying for withholding or removal. Everybody just says asylum. And it's because it's not common. And so being able to identify documents can become tricky, which is why police should not be doing immigration enforcement, because they're not aware of what all these documents mean and what rights certain documents provide. So again, police is cooperating with ICE in conducting these arrests and identifying people in the community. They should not be identifying people simply based on their race or on the color of their skin or on something that's misleading in that nature. police still need to have probable cause to be able to stop someone, conduct a seizure, or ask questions. So it's very important for the community to understand that simply because these agreements are happening in the community, it doesn't mean that you lose your rights. It doesn't mean that you can stop asking questions or defending yourself in a sense, as long as you're always respectful and are doing it in an appropriate manner. And we will discuss what is considered appropriate or not as we talk about what you can do if you find yourself stopped by the police or stopped by immigration. Next slide, Rebecca. Okay, so again, I think that, oops, okay. So I think that when a police officer makes a stop, the question that is asked the most is, can they ask me about my immigration status? Well, when they are stopping you, can they and will they? Maybe. But they cannot stop you for a random reason, and you don't have to answer the question about your immigration status. You do have to provide, I don't want to say you do have to provide, but I do think that there are certain things that you can say to the officer and certain things that you might want to protect certain rights so that you don't lose them altogether. I think that there's a difference if you're stopped by the police and if you're stopped by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Next slide, Rebecca. Okay, and the reason I said a little bit is because I think that before you know what to do, it's important to know what your rights are. So there's two very important amendments that we want everybody to keep in mind. The Fourth Amendment, which talks about, protection from unlawful searches, and the Fifth Amendment, which is your right to due process. And I want to talk about what these two amendments mean and why they're important when you're finding either clients or yourself in these situations. The Fourth Amendment says that there must be a judicial warrant in order for a person to enter a home or conduct a search. And there's a difference between a judicial warrant and a warrant that ICE has within the documents that they normally give a person when they're detained. That's an administrative warrant. The difference is a judicial warrant is signed by a judge. So if if ICE or whoever's at your door knocking or looking for someone has a judicial warrant that's signed by a judge, then yes, they have the right to enter your home. However, if ICE comes to your home and has a warrant and is not signed by a judge, that is not permission to be able to enter your home. And I think what's important to understand is that you have the right to close that door and ask ICE to slip that warrant underneath the door so you can see it. So you can see if the name of the person that's on the warrant is in the home, to see if it's signed by a judge and it's actually a judicial warrant, or to see if it's an administrative warrant and they don't have the right to enter your home. And again, I think that the public is very susceptible to showing deference to officials in law enforcement out of fear, or thinking that maybe if they go along or if they do what they're asked, that they're not going to be heard or something, they're not going to be arrested in these cases. But you have to walk the middle ground, right? Be respectful and kind, but at the same time, defend your rights. And one of those is your Fourth Amendment right to the fact that if they want to enter your home, they have to have a judicial warrant. And the reason that this is important is you want to think about how if you allow them to come into the home, perhaps they're looking for one person, but might find another person who might be in danger. So for example, I had a client, they were looking, ICE came to his home looking for his brother. His brother was a person who had gotten who had a criminal history. My client did not have a criminal history and had lived here for over 10 years, had 5 U.S. citizen children, one who was very sick. And when ICE came to the home, he thought he was being obedient to law enforcement. He allowed ICE to come in. And when ICE realized that the brother wasn't there, they asked my client whether he had permission to be here. And because he didn't, he was detained in that moment. Although my client was very upset, thinking if it wasn't because they were looking for his brother, if it wasn't because he opened that door, if it wasn't because he did not check to see if there was a judicial warrant, he could have maybe not have been arrested that day. The truth is that it did open doors for him because he is eligible for cancellation of removal, which is a form of relief that allows a person to be here if they've been here for more than 10 years, if they have good moral character, if they can show that they have either a parent or a child or a spouse who's a legal resident or citizen, and that that person is going to suffer extreme hardship. So in his case, it was something that resulted in something positive, but that's not always the case. So again, to protect your Fourth Amendment right, make sure that if they are providing a warrant, that that warrant is signed by a judge and that it's a judicial warrant and not just an administrative warrant. Also, something important to keep in mind is that there's a difference, and I always tell clients, I ask them, what color uniform was the officer wearing? So there's a difference between ICE, Border Customs and Border Patrol agents, the police, local police, state police, and ICE police agents are not police officers, and that's important to know. And something else that I can compare it to is in Louisiana, if you're an attorney, you're automatically also a notary. In other countries, sometimes notaries have more powers than attorneys, and it doesn't mean the same thing. So in this situation, just because they are enforcement, it does not mean that they are actually police officers. So the things that you have to answer, the things that you have to do, those can vary and change depending if you're dealing with ICE or if you're dealing with the police department. Things that don't change is that you should always be respectful and not give a reason, a different reason for you to be arrested and then find yourself in a different predicament. The Fifth Amendment is our right to due process. And what this means is the person's right to not incriminate themselves, the right to remain silent. So I asked a deportation officer once, what happens if the person really stays silent? Are you really just going to go away? In my opinion, it's hard to imagine that just being silent will stop a person from being detained. But I tell my clients all the time, what is the difference between you and I if we are both stopped by an immigration officer, right? Until we talk, there's absolutely no difference. I'm just any other Latina. So if my client and I are stopped until the moment that one of us speaks, there's absolutely no difference. So it's very important to keep in mind that you have the right to due process, that you have the right to remain silent, that you have the right to speak to an attorney, that you have the right to not sign anything without legal advice. Those are your rights and you should use them, right? Use your right to call an attorney. Use your right to ask somebody for advice on what you should sign and what you shouldn't. There's going to be documents that you can sign, but you're not going to understand the difference. And if the person's not going to understand the difference of which ones they should sign and which ones they shouldn't sign, then they shouldn't sign at all until they have the right information and can make an informed decision about what they're signing. So the Fifth Amendment is about your right to due process. It's about the right to remain silent, about the right to have an attorney, and about the right to have questions and seek advice. Next slide. How do you exercise these rights? So I tell my clients all the time, I know that certain things that I say are a lot easier said than done. And it's a lot easier to say them than to actually do them. When you exercise your right to remain silent, this doesn't mean that it's going to make you look automatically guilty of something. I think that's a misconception. I think you can exercise your right to remain silent and state that you need to speak to your attorney. Here on the slide, you see that it says use your red card. So a lot of organizations have a card that says, I want to invoke my right to remain silent. I want to speak to my attorney. So ways that you can invoke this right is either saying, I plead the Fifth. I want to invoke my Fifth Amendment right. I want to invoke my right to remain silent. I need to speak to my attorney, showing them the card that says this. You have the right to speak to an attorney. You have the right to not sign something until you speak to that attorney, until you've made that phone call. I tell my clients, I know that this is going to be intimidating for you to do, right? It's not easy to tell a person who's in law enforcement, I'm not going to do something, right? Because we go back to that deference that's natural and in the humanity side of us, that you have a respect for a judge and police officers and all these service providers in our community, but you also have the right to protect your rights. It's important to know that you can ask to speak to an attorney, that you can ask what documents mean, what you're signing. But again, don't sign anything if you don't understand it. Don't sign anything if you don't understand the consequences of what you're signing. And I tell my clients, the worst thing that can happen is them writing the officer or the person who's filling out the work, putting refuse to sign, that you did not want to sign the documents. That's absolutely the worst that can happen, in the sense that way you're not signing something where you're maybe waiving a right, or you are waiving your right to have a hearing, or waiving your right to have an interview, and you're not surrendering that right without knowing and understanding the consequences of what you're signing. I'm not saying that maybe you're not going to be told that you will be detained for a long time, or that it's not going to be easy, or that you don't have any relief. I absolutely think that some of these things are going to happen. I absolutely think that there's going to be people who might use force. It's like any other job, right? There's people who are happy with their jobs, people who are not happy with their jobs. All these things that we forget about, because we're just so focused on like the title of what the person is, and not the fact that we're all people, right? So keeping that in mind, remember that you have the right to say, I want to speak to my attorney. You have the right to refuse to speak. You have the right to show your card, and you have the right to protect this right. If you have an organization that's provided you with the card of information or Know Your Rights card, it'll generally read something like what's on the screen. And so it'll say, please be informed that I am choosing to exercise my right to remain silent and right to refuse to answer your questions. If I am detained, I request to contact an attorney immediately. I am also exercising my right to refuse to sign anything until I consult with my attorney. Thank you. So whether you have a card from an organization, or whether you type this up and have it on a piece of paper, or you have this written somewhere that you can show the officer and invoke that right to remain silent, what's important is for them to know that you are using and exercising all three of these rights, right? The right to remain silent, the right to speak to an attorney, and the right to refuse to sign something that you don't understand, or that the person doesn't understand. Next slide. Okay, so this kind of goes with, if you're stopped, what to do and what certain people can do depending on what your status is, right? So let's talk about first if you're undocumented. So if you have no status whatsoever, or actually, let me say it this way. So for everybody in general, everybody should stay calm and everybody should be respectful, right? No matter what situation you are. I tell my clients, always keep your hands on the wheel if you're pulled over, because that way there's no misconception of you put something in your pocket, or you did something, or you hit somebody, or you hit something, or you put something where it shouldn't be. There will be no confusion about that if you keep your hands on the wheel. So other things is to be alert and be aware. I know it'll be nerve-wracking for the person who's in the situation, and then in the moment when things happen, we don't always think clearly. I was in an accident last week, and even though I'm an attorney and I tell people all the time the things that they should do when they're in an accident, I couldn't remember them for myself, because in that moment I wasn't thinking clearly. So right now that you are listening to this Know Your Rights, and you are finding about the rights that you can use and enforce or invoke, also remember that it's okay to breathe. It's okay to write down names. It's okay to look at badge numbers. These are all things that you can do that will be helpful, so that when you are redacting your statement or telling somebody about what happened during this encounter with the police or with ICE, that you are able to share as much information as possible so that you can get the help that you need. You can always cooperate, but don't necessarily volunteer information that is not being asked of you. Because sometimes we think that we are volunteering information that is helpful, or that we're being open and honest. But actually what we're doing is maybe sharing information that could be misinterpreted. So for example, this morning I had a person in the office who was denied a certain application because of the way that she might have answered the question, right? So there was nothing necessarily wrong with the response, But maybe it's the fact that it could be interpreted in many ways. And unfortunately for her, it was interpreted in a way that it affected her negatively. So don't overshare, but cooperate. You can always ask to speak to a lawyer if you're detained. It's very important that I think simply people knowing that those are your rights and mentioning them when you're having these encounters are important, right? Because I also believe at the end of the day, people could, an officer would take a step back and understand, okay, this person knows that these are their rights, right? And then instead of just assuming that maybe the person will be clueless and they can do other things that will make the person sign a document that they don't necessarily want to sign, right? I think that if the person appears to be someone that listened to this Know Your Rights and knew to invoke your right to remain silent, knew to invoke your right to call an attorney, I think that makes sometimes an officer take a step back. Also, if you have something pending, right? It's important to always carry on your person documents that show that, right? So if you have a receipt notice, if you have your work authorization, if you have a hearing notice, if you have a printout of your hearing notice because you lost your hearing notice, anything that shows that you have something pending and that has your name. I think other things that are important also is, if you are saying that you have children that are born here, that you carry copies of their birth certificates. It's one thing if you say, I have a son born in the United States. It's another thing if you're holding up the birth certificate that has your name on it. So always have documents to prove the things that you want the officer to know. For example, I want them to know I have a work authorization or I have a hearing pending, but you have to have proof of those things that you should carry. I know we are in the world of technology and people often have pictures on their phones, but our phones die. And sometimes they don't work, or sometimes things are erased by accident. Um, I know it's inconvenient maybe to carry around, folded up sheets of paper, but these sheets of paper could save your life or from being detained. So evidence of something that you have pending, an application or a hearing that's upcoming. Another recommendation is also memorizing a phone number. Again, because of the age that we're living in, nobody knows anybody's phone number. It's important to have a number of somebody that you can call in case you're taken into custody, and that you can contact to let them know what is happening to you in that moment. Another recommendation I would say is not to lie. So I tell my clients this all the time. I say immigration cases go wrong two ways. Every single immigration case that has gone wrong is because of two things. One is if you lie, because that lie at some point will come back and get you. I'm not saying that sometimes lies don't take people very far in this process, because it happens. But at some point, that lie will hurt you and that will come back to you. And the second way that cases go wrong is if you're mute, right? So outside of me telling you to remain silent when you're stopped, when you're having one of these encounters, what I mean by remaining silent is if you're in a court hearing, right? If you're in a court hearing and you don't speak up for yourself, if you don't explain or clarify, then that could also cause you to lose your case. So again, do not lie to any of the officers. Don't wait to call or request an attorney. Don't sign anything without legal advice. I'm repeating it over and over because it's that important that it merits being said over and over, because they're rights that we have and they're rights that we have to protect. I would also mention carrying certain types of documents that don't have your name on them, right? So if you have either documents that you obtained that were fraudulent or documents that are for a different person or a family member, you shouldn't have these documents, right? So they should also not be visible, right? You don't have to answer questions that relate to where you're born or how did you come into the United States. These are not questions that you want to answer without the advice or the help of an attorney. And again, they seem like very simple questions, but they're not. Because how you answer and the manner that you answer, all these things will matter, because these words will be put on paper, and these words are something that will come up later to show whether you are credible and everything else that you're going to share about your case or your story. So do not lie, ask for your attorney, do not sign anything without legal advice. Don't carry documents that aren't yours, don't belong to you, or that are fraudulent documents that you obtained somehow. And don't be confrontational, right? I know it's hard to do all of these things at the same time, but again, breathe, and then you will be able to do some of these things, right? You'll be able to remain calm. You'll be able to remember things that you should do to help yourself or help someone else. Remaining calm, being respectful, not lying, not carrying documents that don't belong to you, invoking your right for an attorney, all things that are very important that you should do. Next slide.
I did want to just tell you, Miriam, that there was a question in the Q&A, and I know you wanted to take those as they came in. So this one is about the collaboration between ICE and local police departments. The question reads, Bossier City and another police department in the parish have signed on under the jail model as ICE collaborators. I understand that Landry is pushing for other agencies to join as well. Are there resources to help us understand how those agreements alter established rights and how each model differs?
So I really think it depends per the police department on how they will carry things out. And so I want to say this. So I heard an officer say that the 287G program, like the ones that you're describing in your question, are helpful because that way ICE officers don't have to go looking for people, right? To me, this doesn't make sense because I believe that sometimes if the focus is to get people who have major crimes or things that are of a higher risk or a danger to someone else, what these types of programs do is not that. And so you're asking how or what's the difference between the programs between one city or one parish? It really depends on the leaders and the officials in that police department or in that city. And what that means is that, you know, to what extreme are you going to take the ability to be able to do that? Are you not going to necessarily, your officers arresting somebody because they racially profiled them? But then are you going to have a list of people who just have certain last names that you're going to identify and ask ICE whether they can check whether the person has immigration status? I'm not sure of the ins and outs of how all those details will work out within one police department in the ICE office. What I do know is that it makes it a lot harder to help people who have a pending relief and then commit something such as driving without a license. And I'm not justifying people driving without a license. I think it's capturing more people with very minute things instead of things that are a lot more serious. Prior to this administration, I saw a lot of people who were detained for drinking and driving and domestic violence, two things that can put somebody's life at jeopardy. However, now the things that I see are people who ran a red light or made a bad U-turn or were actually in an accident and the accident wasn't their fault. So I think that how each police department approaches it, it's not necessarily that these policies are going to be different. I think they formulate them based on the leaders in that parish and what the expectations are. I think that their end goal is just to be able to identify people who don't have status through these officers who are routinely stopping people for driving without a license or smaller things. And then the focus at that moment shifts to whether the person has an immigration status or not. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Thank you, Miriam. If another one comes through, I'll let you know.
Okay. Do you want to move on to the next slide? Okay, so what exactly are my rights? So we discussed this earlier, right? Do not open the door. So I tell people all the time, like even if they have a screen door or a second door, opening that door is opening the door to so much more, not just the door to your home. Asking them to show a warrant, again, a judicial warrant that has a person's correct name and address. You can ask for them to slip it underneath the door, but again, checking that it is signed by a judge. If you open the door, I think that there's an assumption that that means that you are giving consent for that officer to come in willingly. And once they're in your home, being able to inspect and search. So you have the right to protect that or stop that from happening by not opening your door unless there is a judicial warrant that is signed that states that they can come into that address, and that the person that they're looking for is in the home that they're trying to enter. If for some reason the officer manages to enter the home, despite the fact that the person might be saying that this person is not at home, it's important for the public to know that they can record. We're in an age and technology where people will record everything, right? And so in incidents like this, it's very important to report, right? It's very important to note names, note numbers, the number of people, the type of uniform, request something in writing from things that are taken, all again, while remaining calm, and making observations of what's going on if they do manage to enter the home. Okay, so what a judicial warrant looks like, this is an image of what a search and seizure warrant would be. And if you look at the bottom corner, you'll see that it says a judge's signature. So the correct type of warrant that you would have to allow someone to come into the home would be a warrant that is signed by a judge. That'll look very similar to the one that's on the screen. Versus the warrant that ICE has within the documents that are given to a person when a person's detained that says warrant for arrest of an alien. This type of warrant is an administrative document. It's not a warrant that allows for the arrest of a person or to enter the home in this to enter the home to look for the person to arrest that person. This type of warrant is not signed by a judge. It does not give permission for ICE to enter your home. It's simply a document stating the person that ICE might be searching for, but it's not permission to enter the home. Rebecca, I think I saw another question, or maybe I didn't answer clearly the previous one. Is there anything you want to share?
There are no additional questions in the Q&A. It looks like some folks are putting in some information in the chat though.
Okay. So if you're the undocumented parent of a child who is a legal permanent resident or a citizen, and you are stopped, I think that I've mentioned this before, but it's important to carry documents to prove everything that you're saying, in a sense, right? You're saying that your name is George, you have a passport that says your name is George, you have an ID that says your name is George. I always say don't necessarily carry your passport so they don't have a document that they can use against you. I say carry any other form of ID or a picture of your passport. If you have a counselor ID, if you have a voter registration card, a form of identification, and also with that, in conjunction with that, copies of birth certificates of your U.S. citizen children. If you have a child that's sick and they have a special condition and you have lots of medical appointments, copy of the letter of the diagnosis of that child's sickness or illness or treatment. So again, very important to carry with you documents that show things that you are going to want to share with an officer that are important to be able to defend your rights. In that moment, when you have these documents, or whether you're showing the officer a document that shows that you have a pending form of relief, it's the officer's discretion to decide whether they detain you at that moment. Prior to this administration, I would hear a lot of people say, oh, I got stopped a couple of years ago, but the officer said I was clean, so they let me go. I hear that a lot. And I think that those encounters means that maybe they checked the history of the person and that person didn't have a criminal history. So again, it's the discretion of the officer to decide in that moment whether it's somebody that should be detained or not. Next slide. So the special immigrant juvenile status is a type of status that allows a person to be in the United States because they've been abandoned by one of their parents or both of their parents. So if you are the parent of a child who has this form of relief and you have the custody of that child, it's also important to carry documents that show that you do have custody of that child. So for example, I had a client, she had her son, he was 18 years old. They were called in to check into ICE. He was detained because they had already gone through the process, gone through the appeal, didn't have anything pending at that moment. So he is detained. And the only reason that she was released is because she had the custody of her niece and her nephew. And because they're minors and they're in her custody. So again, if you are the parent, an undocumented parent of a special immigrant juvenile, and you're stopped by ICE, it's important to let them know that you are the person who has custody of this minor. And maybe show either their receipt notice that this has been filed, the approval notice that they have that status, but a document that shows that you are also the primary provider or caregiver of that person, or of that minor. So whether it's the custody document from the state court that you went to obtain the custody that was necessary for them to obtain special immigrant juvenile status, but a document that supports what you're saying. Next slide.
And I do just want to give a friendly reminder on the time, but thank you
Okay.
so much for sharing this information. And here's the next slide.
Okay, so creating a safety plan. It's important to make a plan for the person who is in need of help, whether it's carrying the card that states that they're going to remain silent, making a plan for their family, making sure that everyone in their family is aware, sharing the plan with other people who can help, memorizing a phone number, like I mentioned earlier, doing powers of attorneys, which is something that we're going to discuss momentarily, and also safekeeping documents and money to be able to maybe pay to provide these services or have these legal services. And storing documents means if you're already aware that perhaps if you're detained, you're eligible for something, keeping a drawer, a box, bags, anything, but a place where you're storing all these documents that are important, birth certificates, documents that show how long you lived in the United States, all these important documents, safekeeping them in one safe place. Next slide.
And Miriam, we have a couple questions in the chat.
Okay. Okay.
So the first one is there any way I can find this information in Spanish? I'm a Spanish-speaking therapist, and I think it'd be wonderful to have this info. I still think I can translate it myself, though.
So I have a Know Your Rights presentation that's in Spanish, and I'm happy to share it with you. So it has a lot of the same information. Or you could actually translate this one. I can share it for you to make it a little bit easier for you to translate. There's also there's a website called there's an organization called the Florence Project. I like them because they have a lot of pro se packets that are in different languages. So they have like a packet that explains about bonds. They have a packet that explains about what to do at your hearing and all these different forms of relief. And you can find them in different languages. So I do like referring people to their website just because I find them very helpful. And it's called the Florence Project. Next slide.
And sorry, there's just one
Was
more
there another question? Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. It's about the Bossier's jail model again. It means they can hold people up to 48 hours after they would have been released if they suspect that they are undocumented, which wouldn't otherwise be allowed. ICE's website says under the warrant service officer model, ICE trains, certifies, and authorizes select state and local enforcement officers to execute ICE administrative warrants. If a cop shows up with an administrative warrant, does this change people's rights?
Okay, wait, I'm not sure I'm understanding. Can you repeat that last part? So
Yes.
you're talking about if the police officer stops a person and the police officer has an administrative warrant, like the ICE warrant?
Yes, I think the question is that because ICE authorizes select state and local enforcement to execute their administrative warrants, if a cop shows up with the administrative warrant, does that change people's rights in the administrative versus judicial warrant?
No, I don't think it does at all. The administrative warrant is an ICE document. So within the ICE documents that a person is given when they're detained, there's the notice to appear. It explains the charges. And the statute under the Immigration Nationality Act that states that the charges listed are indeed following that part of the act. There's a document that's called the Notice of Determination that decides whether a person is given a bond or whether they're released on their own recognizance. And one of those other documents that are included in the packet is the document that says warrant of arrest. It's an ICE document. It is not the same as a judicial warrant. So even if, and first of all, the police officer shouldn't even have that because the police officer is not ICE, right? And I understand that these plans are going to make it confusing, and it's going to create the idea that police officers can carry out ICE's job by identifying people who don't have status. But that doesn't change the part about the warrant. That's still the same, and that's the purpose, right? An administrative warrant is for ICE. A judicial warrant is in any other situation.
All right, thanks, Miriam. We'll go back to the Q&A in a few slides.
All right, next slide. You want to do the next slide? Oops, sorry. Wait, can you go back one? Okay, so one of the most important things to keep in mind is when a person is detained is understanding that their alien number, which is often called the A number, it's a number that starts with the letter A and has 8 or 9 digits afterwards. It is the most important thing, right? It's more important than your name. Because if your name is Jose Garcia and there's several Jose Garcias, we're not going to find you by your name, but we will find you by that A number. So the minute that somebody becomes in contact with a family member or a friend, is sharing the A number with that person so that we are able to find that person on the detainee locator, which tells us where they're detained. So we can find them on the EOIR website to find out when they have a hearing. That number becomes so much more important than any other information that the person has. Also, if you're already in a process and you have documents that have this A number, keeping them in a safe place or telling a friend or family member, hey, I have these documents in this drawer, letting somebody else know about this number, because part of the battle of when a person is detained is gathering information. And if that moment is when we start gathering basic information, it delays the entire process. Calling family members is important. If you have an attorney, or even if you had a previous application, there's a form called a G28. The G28 is a document that allows us as attorneys to ask questions to the different organizations that are under the Department of Homeland Security, whether it's USCIS, whether it's ICE, whether it's Border Patrol. It gives us the authority to be able to say, I'm acting on behalf of this person. So if you leave a signed G28 at home or with a friend, in case that you're detained and that friend or family member is able to give that document to an attorney, that attorney will be automatically able to schedule a call, speak to you, find out information, because they already have a document that's signed by the person to be able to get information. In places like Louisiana, that becomes very difficult because a lot of people who are detained, if you're not able to obtain that information when they're still around here, they're sent to detention centers that are all 3 or 4 hours away from New Orleans. And it becomes very difficult to be able to get the signature on those documents that allow us to act on behalf of people. So I would say that having a signed G28 at home, sharing an alien number with a family member or a friend, and memorizing a phone number of who you're going to contact. Next slide. So I think I already said this as far as just keeping important documents in one safe place. I think just making a list of people that you've been in contact with about your case. If you consulted with someone, if someone gave you a certain document or a list of things that you should keep, just keeping all the documents related to your case and questions that you may have made to someone about your case in one place. Next slide. So things in preparation, right? Sometimes it's inevitable to think that a person's not going to be detained, or that somehow it's going to be stopped, or the person's going to be that an ICE officer is going to use that discretion to release a person. So in preparation for that, every family should have a family preparedness plan, right? And within that plan is having legal documents that will provide assistance to others while you are in detention. So there's a provisional custody by mandate, and a power of attorney. And the difference between those two are that the provisional custody by mandate has an expiration date and the power of attorney doesn't. Next slide. So this is important because it allows another adult, if you have minor children, to be able to do certain things for that child on your behalf. So the provisional custody mandate will have different sections, right? I allow somebody to bring my son or daughter to school. I allow them to bring them to receive medical care and attention. I allow them to reprimand them. So provisional custody mandate allows an adult to care for a child if you or the adult that's supposed to be responsible for a child is not able to. It's also, I think, important to talk to the children directly. I think that one of the best parenting advice that I ever received was from a person who's not a parent. And that was like, talk to my child like they're a normal person. That has been the best advice. And with children in this situation, it's important for them to understand that this could be a possibility, and these are things that you do in case that happens. So talk to your children about the plan, about what to do, so that they're not caught by surprise. And then even though this will always be a situation that's going to worry somebody, having this plan and understanding what's going on is something that's going to help the person remain calm to be able to help a person who's detained. Having a list of all things that are important related to that child so that somebody else who's in care of that child will have that access to that information. There's a person right now that I am trying to represent whose child suffers from muscular dystrophy, and nobody who is at home with this child even knew what medication he took or if he had a doctor's appointment, because the father who is detained is the only person who was doing this with his son. So it's important to make a plan and let somebody else know about your plan when it comes to children, knowing all the things related to a child, such as the name of the pediatrician, upcoming appointments, emergency contacts, places that they visit to get certain services, all listed in part of your plan to be able to share with that family or friend member. Next slide. Okay, so what is a provisional custody by mandate? It's a temporary transfer of legal custody from a parent to another person who's going to be in care of the child. The child must be 18 years or younger. It's done in a format that kind of looks like an affidavit. It's also something that has to be notarized, and it's only good for 1 year. And that's the difference between a provisional custody mandate and a power of attorney. And it can be revoked by a parent at any time. So it's not like if you do one and you change your mind, there's nothing that you can do about it. If a parent chooses to do a provisional custody mandate, they have the right to revoke it at any point in time. Next slide. Do both parents have to sign? No, but the person signing must have the legal custody. And it does not affect the rights of the other parent. So for example, you can't just decide, I'm going to leave my child with my sister, and then the father who's listed on the birth certificate has no right to refute that. It's important that parents still have the right to be able to communicate with that child. It's not that that the person is not allowed to speak to a child or not allowed to visit their child. That can only be prohibited by a court order. So the provisional custody mandate just means that you're empowering somebody to be able to care for the child, to have legal custody of that child, but it does not take away or terminate the parent's rights. We also talk about the benefits that the caregiver can apply for the child, such as Social Security, or something that's very common is supplemental security disability. These programs are programs that are provided, and the caregiver would need to be listed as the person who could be the payee of those benefits. Next slide. Okay, what is a power of attorney? A power of attorney is a similar document. It's a document that allows a person to act on behalf of another person, but it also addresses not just children, but everything else that is going on in your life. So whether it's vehicle power of attorney, so someone can take over the payments of your car or take care of any lien, whether it's a business, financial, checking account, savings account, making deposits, cashing checks, access to your account, property, selling property, buying property, moving property. This addresses all the other areas that relate to your everyday life that you want to give someone access to because you're facing maybe being removed from the country. This is something that allows a person to sign checks on your behalf, to act on your behalf as if you are the signer. So that way, if you are detained, it empowers somebody to be able to do things with your belongings or your ties to the community that you might not be able to do for yourself because maybe you're not eligible for relief or you're not eligible for a bond and you're not going to be able to take care of yourself. So powers of attorney are for your belongings, your businesses, things that you want somebody else to be able to take care of. And the provisional custody mandate relates to your child and you giving temporary legal custody to someone so that they can take care of the child in your absence. Next slide. So both of these are things that have to be put in writing. Both of these are documents that need to be notarized. Both of these are documents that you must have two witnesses sign, stating that they saw you sign the document. There's not necessarily a required form, but they should match everything that you are stating the person has a right to. So there's a website listed from Louisiana State Bar Association that kind of gives you a general overview of what a general power of attorney would look like. Next question. Next slide, sorry. Power of attorney goes into effect as soon as you sign it. Unlike the custody mandate, it's not restricted in time. I think I've already mentioned that part. And the difference with the power of attorney is that you must put your revocation saying that you want to revoke that right in writing. So best practices are always to have someone such as a notary and attorney prepare these documents. And you can also grant power to an attorney to be able to represent or sign certain documents on your behalf. Next slide. Okay, so again, we're mentioning the documents that you should carry with yourself, just like as a reminder. If you have a pending court, carry your notice of hearing. If you have a pending application, carry your receipt. If you have work authorization, carry your work authorization card. Do not carry documents that do not belong to you. Do not carry your passport because it will be taken. And I always say this, I know that people really want their passport and they want to have an ID, but the way I see it is like this. If a young man is walking in the street and he's 17 years old and he's undocumented and he shows a school ID, he's a student. But if he shows a passport, all of a sudden he's treated like a man and an immigrant and a person who doesn't have permission to be here. So I think that it's important to have documents that can ID you, but not necessarily a passport, not documents that belong to someone else. And if you already have an A number that's assigned to you, it's a number that people should memorize along with a phone number of a friend or family member that can be called in case a person is detained. Next slide. If they stop you, disable Face ID on your cell phone. So you have the right to not share access to your cell phone with anyone. And the thing is, again, things that could be misinterpreted, right? So I think that if I was stopped by the police and they saw my phone and the pictures that I have of some of my asylum clients, they would have the wrong idea as far as what I do on a daily basis. So you have the right to not give access to your cell phone. Disable Face ID. You don't have to share your password. You don't want them having access to sensitive information that will provide certain details. You can create certain albums or ways to store information on your phone because I know that we do rely a lot on our phones. We might forget passwords. We can keep them in a safe place. but you have the right to protect this confidential, private information that belongs to you and that you might be storing on your phone. Next slide. Okay, recommendations. There are certain sensitive locations. So at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about how one of the executive orders would give the right for officers to be able to enter schools, hospitals, churches, places, other places of worship, or functions. Because of the policy change, it would allow them to enter these areas. So again, now we're going to put into play everything that we've talked about, right? So we go back to the two amendments that are the most important. Fourth Amendment for being able to search, and Fifth Amendment, your right to remain silent. So again, you need a judicial warrant to be able to search anything, whether it's a car or your home, and you have the right to remain silent if you find yourself in one of these situations. These organizations, especially schools, school can devise up a certain policy of being able to release information unless a judicial warrant is provided, right? So again, they do not have to share information, but if a judicial warrant is signed by a judge, then they are obligated to comply with that order. Next slide. So what is harboring? Being able to shield somebody or protecting them or helping them escape being detained is what's considered harboring. The four essential elements are listed on the slide, which state unlawful entry of an alien into the United States, concealment, harboring, or sheltering of an alien by the defendant's knowledge of or reckless disregard of the facts, defendant's constant substantially facilitating the alien's continued unlawful presence. So if you are transporting somebody, if you are participating in a way that a person is facilitating to be able to obtain documents that do not belong to them, these are all activities that would be considered harboring, right? But helping someone obtain legal services, helping someone obtain an attorney, helping someone fill out an application is not harboring. So it's important to meet the requirements of the applications that the person might be seeking. So for example, and if you're seeking asylum, you must turn in an asylum application before making a year of being in the United States, and helping someone fill out their asylum application is not harboring. It's helping someone seek a relief so that they're able to remain in the United States. Next slide. Places of worship. So again, these areas used to be areas that were restricted at certain times, that they couldn't enter public places as such, but there are private areas where that can still be considered, and for example, in sanctuary cities, places that would allow for a person to seek help and refuge and not be targeted by ICE. But it's important to understand the line between providing a service and then harboring somebody and committing the crime as listed or defined in these terms. Next slide. You also want to make sure that whether it's an organization or a school, that everybody is on the same page as far as the policies of the place. So for example, a school, making sure that the staff and every personnel or teachers are all on the same page. The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act limits the ability for that school to share certain information or who can access it. So it's a way that families can ensure that their information is not shared with ICE unless a judicial warrant is produced. And also that the right of a child to receive an education regardless of their status. I see this a lot with a lot of kids that go through the Office of Refugee Resettlement. They go through that program and are released to a person, and maybe because of their age, certain schools don't want to accept them. And certain schools might say that they're not allowed to register and that they should register for an alternative program, when the reality is that they do have a right to an education, they do have a right to enroll And in the past, I've heard of schools that maybe didn't want to accept someone because they felt that it would lower the test scores and therefore lower their funding. So just a reminder that schools can make a plan. Schools can help families by not distributing this information that they've collected on their students without the person who's asking them, showing them a judicial warrant. Next slide. You can also, schools can prepare by sharing the information about the Know Your Rights and helping families maybe make a family preparedness plan, having meetings with the parents as far as promoting and having a conversation with their child, which I think is very important. Knowing which services and which organizations are available and who does what. And sort of understanding what to do in certain situations. So today, I've talked a lot about the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment and remaining silent, but practicing exactly what that means is important too, right? Because again, it's advice that's a lot easier to give than to follow. And I know that in that moment, it's going to seem like something that's very intimidating. So informing the school about your family's plan and the school helping you prepare a plan is a way that schools and families can collaborate and make this less of a, I wouldn't say scary process because it'll always be scary, but I think more of feeling prepared, which is always important. Next slide. Okay, so again, it's important to create plans, to clarify in certain organizations or churches or schools, which areas are considered accessible to the public and which areas are considered private areas in which ICE would not be able to enter. And again, having a plan and being on the same page as far as what information and what documents can be shared with immigration enforcement. Also understanding and having preparation or rehearsals or drills as far as what to do in certain situations when certain information is asked from an organization or school or person, knowing how to act, what can be provided, what can't be provided, and where to find certain information. So this is a time, I always tell clients, it's a time to do your homework. So your homework is getting all the information that you need and preparing, right? So if you already know that you are in the situation that this could happen to you, it's not about focusing on why am I in this situation? It's about what am I going to do in the future? How can I prepare my family? How do I make sure that things are secure if something does happen to me? And making sure that all those documents and that information is not just stored in your head, but in a cabinet or on a sheet of paper and shared with people who can actually help carry out the plan if you are found in detention. Next slide. Okay.
All right,
So,
thank you so much, Miriam. Sorry about that with the slides.
no worries.
So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A section of Zoom or the comment section on Facebook. We're going to be making sure that Miriam can respond to those. So while we wait for questions, I just want to mention that you can check out our legal help access points to get assistance with your civil legal issues. These access points are physical computers or booths that allow users to access a spectrum of legal services and information, get customized legal information and referrals, see if you qualify for legal aid, schedule meetings with a legal aid attorney, and attend virtual court. Access points are currently in libraries in Lake Providence, Vidalia, DeRidder, and LaSalle. There's also one in Chalmette. So for more information, you can visit this link or this website that's on the screen right here. I also wanted to share that if you have any legal questions that were not addressed during the presentation, or if you need help getting assistance, you can go to the LSBA's Find Legal Help page, where you can access our attorney directory, the Civil Legal Navigator, legal aid and pro bono organizations, the Modest Means directory, and self-help services. You can also access Free Legal Answers, which is an online pro bono program that allows users to log in whenever and wherever and ask civil legal questions and have attorneys answer those questions through the site. Please note that users of the website must meet certain income guidelines. So let's see We'll take a look at the questions in the Q&A. Miriam, if you're ready to answer them, I can go ahead and read them out.
I'm here.
So somebody asked that it seems as though the 287 contracts with local law enforcement raise legal issues of unlawful delegation of non-delegable duties. Because it is unconstitutional for state to enforce immigration laws, an executive order or a contract with local cops cannot overrule constitutional law, right?
I agree. So I would say that that's absolutely true, which is the purpose of being able to provide this information. So that contract is for that police department to work with ICE. I think more in the situation of holding a person, right? So if a certain police departments detain somebody and they pay a bond, okay, normally that person still has this case open. Once they pay the bond and they have an ICE hold, that person is released to ICE custody, right? So I think that if ICE, the rule is that they have the 24 hours to go and pick the person up, or not 24 hours, but the time that they have to be able to pick that person up from the jail. And if they don't, that person, if they paid their bond or if they had already been granted the release, that they're actually released to the public and not released to ICE, right? It doesn't change the rights and the constitutional rights that person has, simply because the police department has agreed with ICE to make sure that they do hold it for that amount of period of time before they come in, arrest or detain the person or place them in immigration custody. It does not erase the constitutional rights that person has, which is why the focus on a lot of these Know Your Rights right now are on the Fourth and Fifth Amendment, because it does not take away the fundamental right of having due process.
Thanks, Miriam. And we've got one more. This one reads, I've seen people come through 72-hour hearings with 72 hours of arrest to appoint a lawyer, set a bond, etc., charged under Louisiana Revised Statute 14-112.12, Louisiana's own immigration criminal statute, unlawful entry into Louisiana. Does that pass constitutional muster? I can repeat if needed.
Yeah, can you repeat it, please?
Yeah. I've seen people come through 72-hour hearings with 72 hours from the point of arrest to appoint a lawyer, set a bond, etc., charged under Louisiana's own immigration criminal statute, unlawful entry into the state of Louisiana. Does that pass constitutional muster?
So I had not had a person convicted under that statute in a long time, in the sense that in Louisiana, there was a time where they did have a statute that said unlawful presence, right? Which is very similar to the unlawful entry. So I would I am always on the defense, right, of being able to provide and look and seek for a relief for that person. So I would say that it's important to, depending on the case by case, I would say, and I know I hate when people give me that response, but I think it would depend on the arrest that led to if there was any other arrest outside of the unlawful entry, right? Because during the presentation, we talked about how police officers don't have the right to arrest somebody solely on your immigration custody, or immigration status, sorry. So I think it kind of depends on how it came into play, would be my opinion.
Okay, thank you so much, Miriam. That was the last question that we had. So that concludes our Law Talks workshop for today. Please save the date for the next one, which is going to be on disability awareness and rights on May 8th from noon to 1 p.m. And you can find more information at louisianalawyersandralibraries.org. And thank you again, Miriam, for presenting on this really important topic with a lot of useful information today. The recording will be available on our Facebook page.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, Miriam. Thank you, everybody, for attending.